Welcome to Ophthalmology Business Podcast. We help you develop your ideal practice with the help of other doctors and experts. The topics will include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I'm Dr. Omar Shakir, one of the hosts of the podcast. Every listener to this podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy at www.obacademy.org. The membership's on us, and it's our gift to you. So today, I'm super excited to have a conversation with my personal friend and mentor, Dr. Del Priore. So Dr. Del Priore is the Robert R. Young Professor of Ophthalmology and Visual Science at Yale. He's the chairman of the department at Yale University and obviously the department chief at Yale New Haven Hospital. He's a former chair at Storm Eye Institute. He's also a bench and clinical researcher and maintains an active research lab at Yale, where he's a pioneer in stem cell research. He's a 2009 Senior Honor Award recipient from the American Society of Retina Specialists, Distinguished Alumnus Award from Wilmer Eye Institute, and Silver Award winner from ARVO. Dr. Del Priore is an incredible physician, scientist, professor, mentor, human, and like I said, personal friend. Thank you for the opportunity to interview you, Dr. Del Priore. Our topic today will be advice from an academic chair, the quote-unquote other side of business. Our conversation will provide an exploration of his professional career, highlighting some key milestones, updates in the field, and offer some valuable advice to aspiring and currently practicing ophthalmologists. So let's jump in. First question I got for you, Dr. Del Priore, is a pressing question personally for me, which is why physics in undergrad? Why did you go for that major?
You know, that's an interesting question. So the reality is that I always loved science, and I still love science. And I love the theoretical aspects of physics, and I love the way human nature is sort of based on physical principles, and how our universe is based on physical principles. So I just love it for the subject matter. I think it's a beautiful field to study. I think it's elegant. Different fields go through different processes of evolution and of growth. And certainly when I was an undergraduate student and graduate student, there have been major advances in physics that have been made over a couple of decades before that. And the field was really just appealing in a variety of different ways. And my own brain is very mathematical, so it was sort of a natural fit from that end. And though I'm a practicing physician and researcher, I've never regretted it, because the reality is that the scientific rigor that's necessary to prove an idea that you have in physics is actually quite extraordinary. And if you can do it in physics, you can almost certainly do it in medicine. It's a totally different way of thinking.
Did you know you were going to be going on to med school, or this was just an interest of yours and then developed into medical?
Actually, the answer is quite the opposite. I had no interest in becoming a physician until I was out of college and in graduate school. So I started out in physics as an undergrad. I had not taken a single biology class. I didn't even know how a cell worked. The only biology I'd ever taken was high school level biology, which is really quite simplistic and quite primitive in a lot of different ways. And when I was a graduate student, two things happened at the same time. The first thing is that we were trying to actually make a device a little bit more sophisticated than something called the photomultiplier tube, which would detect very, very low levels of light. So these devices, if you have a garage door that has a little safety mechanism on it, these are basically photoelectric devices that detect light and turn it into electrical current. We were detecting very, very low levels of light, or at least trying to. So in the physics graduate program, our job was basically to make a light-sensitive detector that could see very low levels of light, the equivalent of just a couple of photons per second coming in. And at the same time that we were doing it, and essentially we were unable to do it, this whole team of physics grad students at the time were not able to do it. I went to a biophysics lecture, and it was by a gentleman named Aaron Lewis, who then became my thesis advisor. And he showed a photoreceptor cell that have thousands of discs vertically stacked on top of each other, each of which had layers, rhodopsin and a monolayer along it. And it occurred to me that the human body was doing something to detect low levels of light that us, with all of our training and all of our expertise and whatever our combined intelligence was worth, that it was basically the body was doing something that we couldn't do. I mean, human rod photoreceptor cells can detect single photons, basically. That was shown years ago by Dennis Baylor and by a few others. And we could not build a detector that would detect a single photon. And at the same time, we've all had the experience. You can walk out of a cave and go out onto the beach, and after about 20 seconds, 30 seconds of adaptation, you can see just fine. And the opposite is also true. So that range is about 10 to the 10th power in terms of the dynamic range of the human visual system. So that's really what did it. That's what got me interested in biology to begin with. It was realizing that our body was doing something which engineers were not capable of doing. I was fascinated by it, and I still am.
So that sparked your interest to go into medical school, and then obviously continued into your pursuit of ophthalmology. And how did you decide on retina? You would have been one of the pioneers in the space.
So I always thought that. So first of all, ophthalmology has so many wonderful subfields within it. But I'm a scientist at heart, and I've always been a scientist at heart. I've always thought that the scientific rigor in each field is a little bit different, I would say. And without casting aspersions on the other subspecialties within ophthalmology, I've always felt and still feel like the understanding of biology, of cell biology and engineering principles, the imaging modalities we have in the retina are just so much more sophisticated than in other fields of ophthalmology, and to a large extent in other fields of medicine. I mean, the only other fields of medicine that I think approach us in sophistication, maybe radiology. I think it kind of does, but there you don't have the patient contact, and for most radiologists that we have within ophthalmology.
Very interesting. Now, to shift course towards what our main listener base is, which is their interest in the business side of medicine, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the business considerations in an academic setting. So, your position as a chair, obviously there are budget considerations and compensation, growth and expansion, resource allocation, et cetera, et cetera. In what ways do you feel you have to flex your business skill set in running a department?
So I think that the business of medicine has changed pretty much every place. I think it's changed in academic centers. I think it has, changed in private practice situations. The reality is, I actually think it's been changing for the last 40 to 50 years. I still remember the first day of medical school, and I went to medical school at the University of Rochester. So here we are, a bunch of 20 somethings. I guess I was 23 at the time. Most of the medical students were a little bit younger because I was in the middle of my PhD program. And just so excited by the thought of being a doctor and about pulling together everything that I had learned to that point to take care of patients and to try and advance the field. And one of the faculty comes in. It must have been someone from the School of Public Health. I actually don't remember who it was. Basically gave a lecture and about how medicine was changing. This is 40 years ago now, and said, "Congratulations, you're all in medical school. You're all going to be physicians. And by the way, within 5 years, you're all going to be working for HMOs. So you made a wrong choice for yourself." So that's what somebody told me 40 years ago. And I mean, I think it's challenging. It's challenging every place. It's challenging in an academic center, and it's challenging in practice. So you do have to use business skills in both. I think that being an academic department chair, the hardest part is the combination of the business part and also keeping faculty and trainees motivated, because the reality is that what drives most people to be a doctor really has not changed over the last 50 years, over the last 100 years, as far as I can tell. Most people go into medicine, because they actually want to help people. I mean, it seems like a stupid answer when you read an essay and you say to somebody, "Why do you go into medicine?" The person says, "I actually want to help people." And when you read it in an essay, you think, "Okay, this is ridiculous. This is another person who says this in his essay or her essay." But the reality is that actually is what drives most doctors, right? I mean, it's trying to get people to be better and to try and console them when there's nothing that we can do to make them better, and to improve their life situation a little bit. So I think the business skill part is important, but I think is equally important is the motivation and trying to maintain the motivation of your team, and basically saying, "Look, of course the business part is changing. Of course the business part is important. At the end of the day, you're still the doctor, you're still the surgeon, you're still the person that's going to decide if this person has useful vision or not for the rest of their lives with the skills that you've been given up to this point. So I don't know if that really answers your question. It's kind of just a circuitous answer, I think, but
No, I think that's important for the listener base to always be reminded of why we're here in the first place. And I appreciate that answer. Just a quick hitter question. What did you listen to on the way to work today? Is it NPR? Is it podcast? Is it radio? What's in your car when you're driving in?
I listen to Spotify. Actually, I've decided to relax, and I can't stand to turn on the world news anymore because
I know.
there's so many disturbing examples of how horrible people are to each other. There's no other way to put it. So I try and listen to music to sort of relax it and then get caught up on the news on the way back.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about your foundational work in stem cell, just in case some of the listener base isn't familiar with how much you've contributed to this field? If you can just give us a quick few minutes primer on what you've done and where we're going with your work.
Well, I think the field is more complicated than I would have thought 40 years ago. If I had realized the complexity, I might have done something else. I'm not sure because it has taken a long time to get to this point. But I do think that we are on the cusp of a scientific revolution, scientific advancement in medicine. That's going to be different than anything we've seen before. Because I think not just in the eye, but in other organs, that we're really on the cusp of essentially being able to replace damaged tissue and damaged organs. Now, in some areas, I think that this is already being done. As an example, islet cell transplants in patients with diabetes. And other areas, I think, especially when you get to neural tissue, as we have in the retina, there's more complexity there that will push the time point further out. But I have very little doubt that we'll be able to replace some damaged tissue in the eye. I think we're already doing that, and that'll get more sophisticated with time. Right now there are, last time I counted, about 20 clinical trials going on, all early, all phase 1 to phase 2, of cell transplants being done for a variety of retinal degenerations, for geographic atrophy, for some hereditary retinal degenerations. And I think it will be years before we see a positive result from phase 3. But when I think about how far the field has moved, I just think we're much further along the path than we were.
Where does your work fit into that? What are you doing nowadays?
So nowadays we're differentiating. We're doing a couple of things. So the first part of what we do, which I think is really important, is actually trying to grow cells in a way that they are biocompatible with use in humans. So this was not known 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that you could generate induced pluripotential stem cells from skin biopsies and then turn them into human adult tissue cells. The techniques to do that were not developed by us, they were developed by others about 15 years ago now, but now that's actually become a therapeutic usage. So right now we're essentially trying to do it therapeutically in patients with retinal diseases. The second thing, which is important, which is not really what we were trying to do, but we've kind of recognized that as you develop cell lines from patients with macular degeneration, that they behave differently than cell lines from patients that don't have macular degeneration, which is sort of interesting. When I give a talk on it, some people tell me, well, that's obvious. Of course they behave differently. But then as soon as you start thinking about it, you realize it's not obvious at all. So we're using that now for drug screening. So we can essentially model different aspects of macular degeneration in a tissue culture dish. And we can screen drugs to see which drugs are able to prevent disease progression in tissue culture. And that's been a very fascinating journey over the last 3 to 5 years. And at the moment, we've identified a small number of compounds that actually prevent disease progression in tissue culture models and in animal models as well. And we're trying to develop those and hopefully commercialize those. We'll see. It's a long road.
Well, we all thank you for this foundational work. I mean, this is really what pushes the progress of medicine forward. That's one of the more significant opportunities in medicine. What do you think is one of the greatest threats facing ophthalmology in the near term?
So I think there are going to be numerous challenges. I think there are going to be challenges. So the landscape is always changing. Yesterday and today are never quite the same. And I almost guarantee you tomorrow will look a little bit differently. So when I think about the threats, I always like to think of it also in terms of opportunities. So I'll give you an example. Example number one, optometrists sort of eroding what the physician base is within ophthalmology. It's kind of like a big issue right now. It's a big issue in the state of Connecticut. So there's two ways of looking at this. So the way that I've always looked at it traditionally is one way. The other way of looking at it is, well, there's a lot of things that ophthalmologists do that actually we probably shouldn't even be doing. Routine eye exams, for example, is one of them. Follow-up of stable glaucoma patients on one type of eye drop. So it feels like a threat, but at the same time, it also has the ability, because there are not sufficient number of ophthalmologists in the state of Connecticut. There aren't enough physicians or ophthalmologists nationwide. It also may very fundamentally change the nature of your practice. I mean, you or I in the future might not see patients unless they need surgery, because they'll be taken care of by somebody else. So I would say that the things about that scare me, what actually scares me has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the care of the patient. That's what scares me, is the patient being taken care of properly at that point. In terms of a professional opportunity for the physicians and whether or not that becomes a viable workforce, I mean, a lot of health systems already work that way in other countries, and the surgeons wind up becoming the surgeons, and that's pretty much most of what they do. And I think for many surgeons, that would actually be more rewarding intellectually and emotionally in a variety of other ways. And it's different. So I think when the word threat comes up or challenges, there's a negative part, but sometimes I think there's a positive part too. And then I think the other one is probably loss of control, which is the hardest thing, for physicians to, I don't know what the word is, relinquish is the wrong word, but that's the hardest thing to sort of give up a little bit on, because the reality is that by the time you've applied to medical school, you've gotten into medical school, you've succeeded in graduating from medical school, you applied to an ophthalmology residency, you finished your residency, and then you did a fellowship at a competitive institution, you're already in the 0.000 something 1% of all the people on the planet. And most people who do that are very self-driven. They are pretty much extremely competent. They know what they were doing. They know what they're doing. They don't want to be micromanaged. They want to be independent. I think that's probably the hardest part. And even there, I would say that there are threats and stresses that go with that, which are kind of obvious. But I would also say that there are potentially opportunities that go with that too, because some of the things that we do to maintain control, with our running our own practice, running our own operation, dealing with insurance companies, if you let that go and you just focus on why you went to medical school to begin with and why you became a surgeon to begin with, it can actually be very rewarding, I think.
Yeah, and certainly that was one of the reasons why I opened up practice as well, was to maintain that type of control. So I agree that one of the biggest threats out there is consolidation, but we have control over consolidation as well, and how that should look. And I think you've done a really good job of how Yale has expanded into the community. So a little lighthearted question: if you're a fellow or a resident in another program, not Yale's program, because I'm assuming the residents and fellows there are great, but what's a pet peeve of yours that they should be aware of? Something that, in case their attendings have similar feelings to you, they should be self-aware of these types of pet peeve, or this big type of pet peeve.
That's an interesting question. I want to make sure I interpret it properly. So, in other words, of trainees and another, not using our own trainees as an example, what's my biggest pet peeve?
Yes, basically.
I think it may be a generational thing, but it's the sense that there's a time that you're a doctor and a time that you're not a doctor during the course of a week or weekend. And that's probably the hardest generational shift. Not the way that I was trained, not the way that I was raised in medicine. And maybe it's a good thing in a lot of ways, because, physician burnout now is not an insignificant problem. And I think it is important that people have time, for their personal lives and to decompress, et cetera. But I think that the most important thing is to maintain, what's the word I'm looking for? Really sort of maintain the compassion, the continuity of care, and availability to either take care of the patient, take care of the problem, or even if you're physically not there and can't go in and see the patient, at least to spend 5 minutes on the phone, talking with the attending physician and saying, look, this is what he or she looked like on Thursday. If based on what you're describing, that sounds like a change. So that's the biggest thing. You can't, it's not really a profession where you can just sort of disconnect when you're actively taking care of, from your work for a period of time. I had a story that I like to reminisce about once in a while when I was an intern, and there were no restrictions on residency hours or anything like that. And I don't think that I was an outstanding intern. I thought I was fine as an intern, but I'm not sure I would have won the House Officer of the Year award or anything like that. I just thought I was a good medical intern. And there was this woman who came in who had left lower quadrant pain. It was mild. On a scale of 1 to 10, you and I would think it was maybe a 2 or a 3, and I wasn't even sure why the attending admitted her. And he said, well, no, there's something wrong. So I was the intern, so I was tasked with going by to examine her basically twice a shift, 3 times a shift. And she had been in the hospital for about 2 days. The attending was getting ready to discharge her the next morning. And at 5 o'clock, 5 after 5, my beeper goes off. And I had just come off duty after 36 hours of being up straight. And the nurses said, Mrs. So-and-so is complaining of a little bit more pain in her abdomen when you go examine her. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm actually not on duty. The on-call person is on duty. But I went by anyway. I said, hello, I saw her, I examined her. And there had been a subtle change. Now, I had been examining her, twice in every 8-hour shift for a couple of days. And I thought her point tenderness of the left lower quadrant definitely increased and got worse. And I don't think anybody else would have picked it up, not because I was brilliant and not because my exam was any better, but I don't think anybody else would have picked it up because they wouldn't have seen her over that period of time. And I still remember calling the surgeon and telling him I thought she had gotten worse. And the attending surgeon was sort of irate, saying, is she definitely worse? Because if you're telling me she's worse, I'm going to have to cut her abdomen open. And I'm not cutting her abdomen open based on an intern. And he said to me, are you sure she's worse? If this is your mother, do you want me to open her abdomen to make sure that she's not worse? And, somewhat hesitantly, I said, you know what? I understand what's at stake here, but yes, I think she's worse. And she had a ruptured diverticulum, which was not picked up on imaging, actually. So I say that not to brag about my diagnostic skills, because really it had nothing to do with that. It's just the continuity part. And that's probably the hardest part that I have with the way training programs are set up now and the way we sort of shift patients back and forth to each other because of restrictions and hours and that sort of thing with trainees. I think that little piece is sort of missing.
I agree. That's excellent advice for if you're a trainee out there to heed those words. When you compare and contrast your leadership positions, and you've been at a lot of places in some pretty significant academic positions and institutions, I'm sure there's a lot of overlap in terms of what challenges there were and what qualities that you needed to exhibit to be a good leader. What would you say in this current environment? So being the Yale department chair, what is something that's unique as a challenge to you in this that you had not encountered before in a previous leadership position that is evolving you as a leader?
So I think the most challenging piece of being a leader, I don't think it's unique to Yale, but certainly has come up at Yale. But I think the most challenging piece is to keep everybody motivated and thinking on the same page and working together, even though the conditions might not be ideal. So, for example, finances are different than they were pre-COVID. I mean, they're different with every place within the hospital system. I talk to friends of mine that are chairs all over the country. This is not unique to the Northeast. It is not unique to Connecticut. This is present all over the place. So it's an external stressor that we don't have very much control over, right? And then secondly, demand for our services has gone way up, which has stressed out the faculty and our trainees because the patient volume is almost unmanageable in certain circumstances. So the hardest thing is to just keep people working together as a team, recognizing that the faculty and the residents are being very reasonable, and that they are being overworked, and there is a lot of stress in the system right now. But just trying to remind everybody of why we do what we do and why what we do is so important. I think that's the most unique challenge that's facing us right now.
Yeah, that's predicted to get much, much more worse over the next decade or two. And like you said, some models may have to exist where surgeons only do surgery, and the primary care has to be shifted off in order to take care of everybody that needs the care. Uh,
Well, the good news is we'll always have jobs. We'll always be employed.
that's so
That's the
true.
good news.
And that kind of leads into my next question, which is if you're a young ophthalmologist or a trainee that's heading into your professional career, what's the value proposition? So we're talking in business mindset here. What is the specific value proposition of being involved in an academic department, that something they won't get from a private practice setting, that you would tell someone to say, hey, you should consider this because you will not get XYZ from your private practice setting?
So you might not remember this about me, but I was actually in private practice for a couple of years when I finished my training for a variety of reasons. And there were things that I really liked about it, and then things that I didn't really like about it. And what I tell trainees now, and I tell people who's trying to recruit them, is basically a couple of things. So the first thing is, you know what, we're really in a special profession, and we're really in a special place. There are people that would kill to be able to do what we do on a on a daily basis, and that there are many settings in which you're going to be very happy practicing, taking care of patients, and that you'll have the financial resources under most circumstances to be able to take very good care of yourself and of your family, and that your needs are going to be met. So that's the first thing. I think, having said that, you just have to decide as an individual, which is what I tell the trainees, what feels better to you, what your goals are, what you're willing to sacrifice to achieve those goals. So, and it's a very individual decision. I don't think there's a right or a wrong choice here. I don't think there's a right or wrong choice. What I tell people is you're going to have advantages and disadvantages to each one. In a practice setting, you're going to have more control. I used to say that before private equity. I don't know if I'm going to change my tune or not. We'll see how much further private equity goes. But prior to private equity, I think you had, a lot more control. Now, if you are in private equity group, I don't know if that's true or not. I think that story is still unfolding. I think financially, most people do better in a practice setting, unless they're not running the practice well, which I've also seen. Where you'd be surprised actually, if you're not being efficient, because there are efficiencies of scale. I mean, right now our medical group is 1,400, 1,500 physicians, another 1,900 Northeast Medical Group. The centralized functions that take care of things like human resources, billing, compliance, handling medical records. You'd be surprised how much that actually takes off your plate, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, having been in practice now for a couple of years. Ultimately, for me, it's about you're at the buffet of life. You're literally walking into one of the finest restaurants, and every kind of food imaginable is basically there for you to present it. But you're only going to be able to eat a certain amount, right? So you're vegetarian, go over here. You love Italian food, go over here. You love Chinese food, go over here. But the reality is, you're actually going to be well fed, and you're going to do just fine. And I call Yale my intellectual 401k plan. I'm not complaining about my real 401k plan at all. But on top of that, it really is an intellectual environment that is just secondary to none. So if you like that, it's a perfect place to be. You'll be intellectually stimulated. You'll really love it. And other people, they don't enjoy that part as much, or they really love the patient care part, or they can't give up the control part, and which I understand too. I think there are so many ways of being successful in our field. So many ways.
I like that analogy of the buffet, because I once had an attending who described academic position as fine dining with a 3-course meal versus private practice setting is the buffet where you just take versus
Yeah.
in an academic setting you build up to like you say, you build up till your intellectual curiosity peaks later on, and you get to have higher and higher leadership positions. And I like that. And then the last question for you before I let you go and get back to work is, who was your favorite fellow over these years?
Oh, well, I can't answer that question because you're my fellow. I have to exclude you. Is that what you mean?
That's good. Well, thank you for taking the time today. I can't thank you enough for what you've done personally and professionally for my career, and what you've done for hundreds, if not thousands, of students and trainees that you've interacted with. It's always an honor being in your presence, Dr. Del Priore.
Omar, take care of yourself. Okay. Thank you. It was nice seeing you again. And
You as well.
I love seeing your stuff on social media. I think it's really fabulous. Your surgical videos, it's really wonderful.
I appreciate that. Thank
Wonderful
you.
to see you thrive. Yeah.
All right. You be well.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So I want to take a moment and thank our listeners as well. We appreciate each and every one of you as well. We can't do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, please share it with your friends and family on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes and Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing you all an amazing week ahead.